so laid back. You're just ready to have a conversation anytime. So,
I got to do what I can for Mr. Jeff Tucker. So
all right. Well,
trying to pretend like I'm relaxed. I'm actually very, very nervous right now.
right. So Gabe Sukenik, right? Am I pronouncing that exactly right?
Yeah, Sukenik, but I won't fault you on the Polish pronunciation.
Right. So we're now on the this is the fourth anniversary of the great Bitcoin pizza thing. Can you review that history for us real quick?
Yeah, it was a couple years ago now, 4 years ago, on the forums where somebody by the handle Laszlo was looking to buy some pizzas, and he offered 10,000 bitcoins for anybody that would just go purchase two pizzas for him, because somebody's got to take Bitcoin for something, right? And you could almost call that one of the greatest economic experiments of all time, because you're really just taking like this non-money and trying to use it as money. And fortunately, it worked. And now we've evolved to $500 Bitcoin. So obviously, paying 10,000 Bitcoins for a pizza sounds pretty absurd these days.
Yeah, it does. But I think that actually it's more correct to describe the initial price of Bitcoin as dating from the previous October, where there was a first public posted exchange rate, but it was something like a twelfth of a penny or something like that, right?
Yeah, at the time, yeah, I mean, there was no like exchange really publishing anything. Trades were happening in Bitcoin forum talks.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's fair to say it really had a price, because it's not like the market had anywhere to turn.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, maybe like a primordial ooze of price. But the reality is, back then, nobody really knew. So people were just kind of guessing. I don't know, maybe 10,000 Bitcoins is worth two pizzas. Maybe it's worth 8 pairs of socks. I don't really know.
Right. It took me a long time to figure this out. Like, there's the great mystery from a theoretical point of view. Not that the theory matters in the end. I mean, there's just the facts that matter. But still, from a theoretical point of view, I was very confused for a long time, even long after you gave me my first Bitcoin. Why it is that Bitcoin had value, and it took me a long time to figure out that there was a significant amount of time between the Genesis block of January 2009 and it's having obtained any kind of monetary currency value at all, and that this time passage was important to test out the payment network, and that is the source of Bitcoin's value. Would you think that that's a fair description?
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's why I think it's super important that people think of Bitcoin as two separate things. You have the currency and you have the payment network. And it's the payment network, this ability to send value anywhere at any time to anybody, and if there's a limited amount of currency units for that payment network, then that's where the currency's value is really going to come from. So it allowed just this new transaction network, and the currency unit could base its value off of how many people wanted to use this payment network.
Right, and there was at the time a great deal of questions surrounding whether or not the payment network could work, because this is a new technology. The blockchain was a brand new technology, so you had to test it for a number of considerations. One is its open sourceness. Can you look at the code and really trust it? Is there a central point of failure, which had doomed every previous attempt at a digital currency? But I guess most importantly, it was the question of property titles to Bitcoin itself, and whether or not it could actually falter on the problem of double spending, which had also similarly doomed previous attempts at digital currency.
Yeah, and early on, this actually was like when we talk about the time of 10,000 Bitcoins for a pizza. I forget exactly when this happened. I think it was maybe like July or August of 2010. But somebody actually had created a transaction, and as they were making that transaction, they actually created like more than 21 million Bitcoins somehow. So all of a sudden, you now had outside of the 21 million Bitcoin limit. And that got fixed very, very quickly.
Oh, so was that another fork in the chain that occurred? Or was that a fork, or what happened, actually?
I wish I were technical enough to be able to explain it. I'm not. I just know that at some point very, very early on in Bitcoin history, somebody was actually able to create Bitcoins kind of outside of the parameter that had been originally outlined.
Right.
So, and just like the blockchain fork that we experienced almost a year ago, this was a problem that was in the Bitcoin network because it wasn't, cooperating with the rules that we had expected and wanted. But because it's a program that we can keep toying around with and updating, we were able to fix these types of errors. So yeah, at some point somebody had been able to generate more Bitcoins than we were supposed to allow, and this was patched, I think right around the time of the original Bitcoin pizza transaction. I think it was really that far back.
Well, one of the coolest things to me that to have discovered about Bitcoin is just how sort of severe it is in terms of money creation. Like, even without an ideology, even without a kind of a consistent, monetary theory, Bitcoin's just intuitively sound because it's just strict about ownership. And that to me, that's one of the most amazing things about Bitcoin is that it essentially has nothing in common with state-based monetary systems for this reason. It's like you can't just, it's not like in 2008, with government monetary policy, you just manufacture a few trillion new dollars and leave it at that. That could never happen under Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think the concept of truly owning your own property is maybe one of the most underrated aspects to Bitcoin, even to date. So when you even hear Bitcoin proponents talking about, ease of transactions and privacy, and you can do micropayments, these are all great things. But I think you're hitting it on the head. The really revolutionary point is that you can now be the sole owner and purveyor of your wealth. So you're not leaving your private keys with a bank. You're not leaving your private keys with the government. It's literally only you, and that's a type of property that has never ever existed before.
Yeah, you said it. You said. I mean, I remember after you gave me or I sold you my tie or whatever the heck happened. You transferred Bitcoin to me. It was a little more than a year ago now. I remember coming back to my office and sort of looking at it and digging through the research, and the Wikipedia entry wasn't comprehensible to me. I read the white paper, which I couldn't really understand because I didn't know a lot about. I hadn't really sort of focused on distributed networks and the blockchain and all these things. But I remember reading an article. I think it was in Slate or somewhere that was talking about the death of Bitcoin. Of course, it's been declared so many times, right? But in the course of this article, it mentioned in passing the problem of double spending and the ownership of the individual over Bitcoin, and that's what sort of like jumped out at me, in like neon from the article. I thought, oh, okay, this is like radically different from anything I thought, and that's what swung me over, from being like weirdly skeptical, like maybe this is just some kind of money crank operation, to actually realizing it was a real deal.
Sure. I mean, self-ownership, especially when you talk about the more libertarian, anarchist roots of Bitcoin, a concept of self-ownership as powerful as Bitcoin really went a long way, I think, for people like yourself and many, many others to understand the value here. In Cyprus, when everybody thought they owned their bank account, and then it turns out they didn't own their bank account, that's where it really hit them really hard. And different people are going to experience this in different ways. But whether you're a casual PayPal merchant who all of a sudden, some transaction was reversed on you and you just, PayPal took $10,000 out of your account, or if you're in Cyprus, or if you're in Africa getting remittance from your family and you have to depend on Western Union to provide that to you. The concept and realization of self-ownership is probably the most powerful feature of Bitcoin.
Now, Gabe, when your consciousness of Bitcoin began, at what point in the pricing structure?
That's a good question. That's the right way to ask it too. I'd first discovered Bitcoin that summer of pizza. So I was first introduced to the idea, And for me, I was like, okay, well, limited amount of currency. I was a gold bug. I've been a libertarian for a long time. I actually worked on Ron Paul's campaign. So, limited supply sounded great, but I didn't understand the program. I didn't understand the true nature of this decentralized technology. And that took me months, if not a year, to really understand and appreciate how powerful a system of self-ownership Bitcoin really was.
But you've watched the iterations of public psychology over price, from virtually nothing to where we are today. And I remember you and I were kind of riding up and down that roller coaster. I guess it was April of 2013. When I think we, for instance, since the beginning of the year, we had ridden from the dollar exchange rate of like 12, and then it was like 30, and people were saying, well, this is a terrible bubble, and then it was 80, and then we got used to going to bed at night and waking up with 20% price increases over the course of like a week, and suddenly it hit 260, and then tumbled back down again. You remember all that?
Jeff, I went to a meeting with a particular gold and silver friendly hedge fund the morning that we hit 250, and I'm telling you guys, this is great, this is brilliant, it's super libertarian and cool. I get back to my office and I was staring at $80 Bitcoin. So I remember that one very, very vividly.
Yeah. I remember you and I were talking during this period, because I was like a little bit white with terror, because like old Bitcoiners are like, who cares? This is just nonsense, the usual blather, right? But I was really new, right? And I had written like a big series of articles, promoting or like celebrating Bitcoin, really, and so suddenly I felt like personally responsible for this price fall. And you and I were talking during that day, and I remember it hit something like 110, and you were like, I'm buying like crazy here. This is the time to buy. And I was kind of like, well, how do we know actually? It was just a funny period.
It was, and so literally that exact day, obviously everybody's panicking, the exchanges are broken, so we were almost back in this zone of what's the price of a Bitcoin? Nobody knew.
Right. I forgot Mt. Gox collapsed. Yeah.
Gox was down, so nobody knew what the price of Bitcoin was. And we had people that wanted to buy at $50, and we had sellers at $100. And how do you explain this? But I mean, still, deals were happening, prices were being made, and somehow a market continued to evolve.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about it. It's just been fun to watch because of all the fits and the starts and the technical failings and everything, none of which trace to Bitcoin itself. It's the infrastructure surrounding Bitcoin. But one of the things I love about it is that Bitcoin doesn't care about the pundit class. Everybody's always gone, and this is true again now, right? So we've been stuck at like 400. I don't know what. Has it been 6 weeks? It's been dreadfully boring 6 to 8 weeks of nothing happening, right? And then suddenly now today it's taking off again.
And it's funny. So I mean, we say the last 6 to 8 weeks nothing has happened, and obviously we're talking about the price,
right?
And hopefully as more and more people get used to Bitcoin, we'll get more and more adjusted to totally disregarding the price.
That's right.
But let's talk about what's happened over those last 6 to 8 weeks. We've had major payment processors say they're going to start bringing Bitcoin onto their platform. You have major investors that are making institutional bets into the Bitcoin economy. You have new countries all over the planet announcing they're bringing in their first Bitcoin ATMs. So, and even PayPal a week ago at a shareholder meeting was talking about integrating Bitcoin.
And you've got wallets increasing, right? Increasing transactions and wallet downloads, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. So you still have more and more people learning and downloading Bitcoin. You still have more and more developers that are spending their human resource capital, probably the most important thing in Bitcoin. They're still slaving away at their desk creating new code. But I mean, obviously the price affects mentality
Yeah, I like
significantly.
the way you're thinking here. I mean, the price is in many ways a distraction, and I find myself getting distracted by it. And the reason is that when things are going up, there's a kind of a public frenzy, like today, suddenly, out of nowhere, everybody's suddenly
Right.
caring about Bitcoin again. 2 weeks ago, everybody was like bored by it. It's so funny how price changes affect public psychology.
Yeah, I was just talking to my dad yesterday, who now, because of me, he's at least checking Bitcoin prices. So he's like, Gabriel, things must be so boring, nothing's happening. It looks like, I guess this is dead. And I was like, but over the last 8 weeks, I've heard more positive news than I had the last 8 weeks before that. So what's really changed here? It's funny. It's definitely interesting to watch people. It's funny to watch businesses and industry evolve on one side, and then the price, somewhat follows it, somewhat doesn't, but it really has a mind of its own.
Well, it's a little like what happened. Was it a couple months ago when Mt. Gox finally collapsed? Everybody in the Bitcoin world I knew was like, it couldn't happen soon enough. There was, finally it was like, let's now we can move on to building good solid infrastructure behind Bitcoin without this ridiculous distraction. And meanwhile, in the press, it was once again, RIP Bitcoin.
And all I know is every time I see an RIP Bitcoin, that's one of my better buying indicators. So I'm not a great trader, but when I see the headline Bitcoin is dead, I have an idea of whether I should buy a little more or not.
It's so boring after a while. I've stopped paying attention to this stuff because you read the articles and they're always they'll get it like superficially right, but they'll always make some big like egregious error in the middle of the article. Describing Bitcoin as a company or something like that, or saying that Bitcoin is too expensive or whatever. But once you realize actually that Bitcoin doesn't actually care about the commentators, then it's possible to settle down a little bit and think about the long term. And it must have been this way with all the other big technologies, flight, electricity, railroads, whatever.
Yeah, and I kind of like the quiet periods. I think those are the periods of the most work getting done. That's when everybody's kind of sitting in their battlefields and working on plans for, most of the Bitcoin companies that are out there today aren't worried about whether Bitcoin is $500 or $1,000 right now. They're worried about building out infrastructure for when Bitcoin is orders of magnitude larger than where it is today.
Yeah, and it's too bad that that's not all they can worry about, because I mean, unfortunately, you have growing threats of sort of government regulation and a certain, how would you say, regime uncertainty. Around. Some agencies calling it property, others calling it currency. Some people threatening to kill it. I mean, this is a real distraction for the Bitcoin community, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I get, unfortunately, it's all I can possibly expect from governments all over the place. So I'm not looking for anything better. I think it does just point out that Bitcoin, obviously, very, very global, but companies are going to have to find localized solutions to these types of problems. So I'm noticing from my own standpoint that if we want to build liquidity in local communities, it really requires exchanges and activity in that local community. You can't just rely on an exchange on the other half of the planet to create the type of liquidity you need in a local market. And obviously there's all sorts of weird rules and regulations that come with that particular local market. Which is why I'm excited that entrepreneurs will ignore the price movement. They'll concentrate their time and efforts on, okay, listen, we're here in Uruguay. We need a product for our citizens here, and we need to build liquidity here. How do we do that? And they're hunkering down, and they're building these tools and creating the types of corporations to cooperate with regulations so that people can use Bitcoin in, for example, Uruguay.
Do you think that now, when you and I first met in New Hampshire, I guess it was January or February, something like that, 2013, the altcoin market was not very sophisticated. I guess Litecoin existed more or less, but that's one of the big changes that's happened over the last 16 months or so. is this sort of proliferation of other cryptocurrencies. Do you think that's helped the Bitcoin markets, or hurt, or do you think it matters at all?
I think it's just part of the grand experiment more than anything else. So I like seeing programmers dedicating time to solving these types of issues. I'm not smart enough to tell a programmer that this altcoin is correct and this one isn't. But I find it exciting to see so much work and manpower being put into it. But definitely when we were in New Hampshire, the altcoin market was not very significant. And now it takes up a real sizable chunk of the digital currency market. Some projects I think are really exciting. Other projects, even from just a pure PR perspective, and a lot of people kind of hate on coins like Dogecoin because it doesn't add something technologically, but I do think it adds something from a PR perspective.
That's huge. Marketing is everything. I mean, at least it's not everything, but it's a significant and oftentimes overlooked feature of the world of economics.
Yeah, I think it's silly to discount it. I mean, obviously the Bitcoin community is very guy heavy. If Dogecoin brings more females to cryptocurrency, that sounds like a net plus to me.
I had a gender-based theory of Dogecoin when I was in, and I remember being in Texas, and I kind of took an informal poll, and the results were exactly the opposite of what I expected. Like all the guys like Dogecoin, and all the girls like Bitcoin. So, so I'm not sure how valid it is. At least I didn't check out on that one thing, but it certainly seems to. It conforms to our intuition in some ways.
So all that matters is if Dogecoin appeals to somebody that isn't a Bitcoiner, great.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Right. Then suddenly you're interested in crypto. And the Dogecoin raced that car, I guess, at some recent race, so that was kind of cool.
Right? How many NASCAR fans now know about Bitcoin because there was a giant fluffy dog on the back of a car?
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to fight against that.
Right. Other things that have happened since our first meeting are like the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto was outed by Newsweek magazine. I'm teasing.
Yeah. I like Trace Mayer's joke that a unconfirmed transaction is now called the Dorian, so I think that's pretty good.
That is.
I gotta give credit to Trace Mayer for that, but
that's really funny. Well, I hope I'm going to see you at a Bitcoin conference very soon. And I'm really happy to catch up with you again. These are interesting times. Do you want to? I mean, I can't possibly trick you into calling a price top, can I?
I don't know. I don't even know if there's a point. I mean, it's if we want to look at some really quick math. Let's look at the last bubble, right? So we went from, call it $50 to $250 and basically came back to 50. So I don't know. I mean, maybe if you say we hit 1,000, we fell back to 500. I don't know. Maybe a couple $1,000s of Bitcoin this year doesn't sound crazy, but right. I wouldn't be upset if we keep this stability.
Well, that's right. That seems consistent with price patterns in the past, but it's like
who am I to tell Bitcoin what Bitcoin's going to do?
So. That's the way I feel about it now too. It's like, let's just wait and see. That's part of the fun of this developing market, is that nobody's really an expert on it, and that's fantastic. I made one good call of a 1K by the end of 2013.
That was a good one.
And then people have since pointed out to me, they said, well, that's amazing that you called the top there. That's really fabulous. But did you actually anticipate that it was going to be 400 and 3 months later? And, I mean, my answer to that is, well, I wasn't really thinking past that, but probably not, So,
right.
So, and I've heard people
No,
advise me in the past, like when you make a prediction, you can call a price, or you can call a time, but don't ever call both. And if ever in your life you get both exactly right, just never make another prediction.
that sounds like a good way to swing 1,000 to me. Yeah, if I were a better trader, I'd be a happier guy these days. But I see it as it's a long road. It was a long road when we first talked about this a couple years ago, and
Oops, I might have lost you, Gabe. May have lost you. You want to restart? I may have just lost you. Well, we're coming to the end of our hangout in any case. So, Gabe, thanks so much for being with me, and I hope we'll talk again real soon. Bye bye.